Oh. I've got an apple for both of you, but I'll give it to you after class, just in case you're wondering about it. Okay. So let's start with the prayers. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Well, in case you're wondering, for those of you who hear me say, through the accumulation of merit and wisdom, which is usually not done. Usually it's through the merit of accumulating, right? But His Holiness has said on many occasions, especially in the past, that just saying merit is not enough. It's not just merit, but it's also wisdom, and it should be the accumulation. But just saying through the accumulation of generosity sounds odd. In English sounds just a little weird. So I changed it to through the accumulation of merit and wisdom, and so on. Yeah. So it's a slightly different version. Okay. All right, let's see, where did we get to? Just have to find the text. Oh, here it is. So I'm working on the next pages of the material. I've got until about 140, but we won't cover all this during those last, how many classes we've got left? Including today, we've got 4 classes left for this term. We won't be able to cover those last 30 pages, 20 pages. But anyway, I'll give you the new material soon. We got to page 109, yes, 109, which is an extensive presentation of the qualities. So the qualities of a bodhisattva once they reach the first ground. So more specific, what are the qualities? Well, one thing that has changed from the first term, for those of you who were here, I used to give you homework. Remember? Yeah. But because we were talking about the homage part, that was all about compassion, about love, closeness towards other sentient beings, and it was much easier to give your homework. At this point right now, it's a little abstract. It's just this prepared, like this kind of introductory material. It's kind of difficult to say, well, meditate on the first ground. It's not gonna. So there's this kind of explanation Lama Tsongkhapa gives before he dives more into generosity and so forth, the perfections. When it becomes something, it's much easier to ask you to practice at home, basically. So for the time being, until we've gotten through this part, you're free of, you don't have to do homeworks, except maybe reading the text if you're interested to read in advance. It makes a difference. But other than that, yeah, for the time being, no homework. So, an extensive presentation now of the qualities. Now Lama Tsongkhapa explains, and based of course on Acharya Chandakirti's text, Entering the Middle Way, he explains more specifically what are the special qualities of a bodhisattva. What is so special on that particular level when bodhisattvas realize emptiness directly, when they realize ultimate nature, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. Now, this has 3 parts. The qualities that beautify the bodhisattva's own mental continuum. That's a weird word in English, kind of like beautify. But it's not beautifying, of course, the external appearance, the external physique of the bodhisattva, but instead the mind, the mental consciousness of the bodhisattva. That's the whole thing we're interested in. I mean, that's the main focus in Buddhism. It's all about the mental consciousness. Basically, of the different aggregates, it revolves not around the sense consciousnesses. They're also important. Especially the ear consciousness, listening to teachings, but of course also the eye consciousness. For instance, seeing His Holiness the Dalai Lama, other great lamas. In that way, of course, the sense consciousnesses are important, but the focus is on the mental consciousness. So they beautify, certain qualities beautify the bodhisattva. Okay. Then the qualities that outshine others' mental continua. So then there's another category of qualities that are explained mainly from the point of view of outshining others, other practitioners. In particular, the practitioners of the foundational vehicle. So outshining, excelling, surpassing these particular practitioners, and in which ways these are surpassed. And the quality that comes to be superior on the first ground, like a summary. Okay. Oh, no, sorry, that's not the summary. The quality that comes to be superior, that is generosity. Talking about generosity. Okay, so the quality that beautify the bodhisattva's own mental continuum. Again, there are 2 parts to it. First, there's a description. The individual's qualities are separately described. And then second, the qualities are presented in a summary. Okay. Now, the first one, Entering the Middle Way, Acharya Chandakirti's text, describes the following 8 qualities. There's 8 special qualities that beautify a bodhisattva who has reached the first ground. The first of those is obtaining a meaningful title. Is that so important? I guess yes. I mean, someone who is deserved to be called something. So, yeah. So they're receiving a meaningful title here. So what does Lama Tsongkhapa say? Well, first Acharya Chandakirti says, from that point on, having attained this ground, the bodhisattva, they are hailed by the name bodhisattva alone. And that's followed by Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation of this root text, but he intersperses it with his own explanation. So from that point on, the bodhisattva, having entered this first ground, has attained the ultimate awakening mind. At this time, when he has transcended the stage of an ordinary person, he is hailed by the name ultimate bodhisattva alone. He should no longer be referred to by characterizations not consonant with this title, for he is by then an Arya bodhisattva. Yeah, I prefer to say they instead of just, I don't want to say she either. It's just another, some people choose she, which is kind of nice, but I just choose they usually. But anyway, so here it says he. These 2 lines, now this is of course, the translation of Lama Tsongkhapa's text and the translation of Acharya Chandrakirti's text. These two lines, so from that point on and so forth, these two lines from entering the middle way, they mark the moment when a practitioner on the Bodhisattva path crosses a decisive threshold, no longer counted among ordinary beings. They come to be called ultimate bodhisattvas. So it's just, I guess Lama Tsongkhapa is stressing it, of course Acharya Chandrakirti too, this is huge. This is huge because for the first time there's a life-changing event. I mean, the bodhisattva starts removing afflictions, starts removing stuff from their mind, from their mental consciousness. That's not on the nature of the mind, but that causes the bodhisattva all the suffering they've experienced so far. And in our case, of course, we're still stuck with that. We're kind of, I don't know where you are, but in my case, far away from that level. So I've got to carry these afflictions and the consequences of these different minds still around with me, and they create suffering on a daily basis. When I say suffering, of course, I'm not talking about what we ordinarily identify as suffering, but just these limited happy experiences that we call happiness, but they're so limited. Limited in at least two ways. One way is, if I don't change the object of these pleasant or happy experiences, they inevitably turn into suffering, what I would also call suffering. Now, this, I don't need to tell you this, but when I teach like an introduction to Buddhism, and I talk about things that are in the nature of suffering, people go, oh, you're so pessimistic, what is going on? But then I ask, so okay, all right, I accept there's things that you think are really, truly happy. Give me an example. And so it's not usually peanut butter or, it's not really that. But it's things like, spending time with my friends, going out with my friends, going on a vacation. All right, so going on a vacation with your friends. Now you have to be with that friend in that vacation, in that place for the next 105 days. No one else, just your friends, because it's in the nature of happiness. So your happiness should grow because there's in the nature of happiness. I mean, oftentimes I say just being with my friends. Well, I'm going to lock you into a room with these people for the next, 40 hours, no, longer, 40 days. So your happiness should increase because it's in the nature of happiness. Oh, wait a minute, no. Yeah, so therefore, first of all, whatever it is, unless we change the object, it's going to turn into suffering. Taking a hot bath. Oh, what's going to happen? I mean, it's just the nature of our body. Our skin is going to peel off and I mean, a hot shower, same thing. Maybe it's not as fast. But anyway, so whatever it is, it's so fascinating. Whatever pleasant experience there is, the most delicious food, keep eating it and you're going to get violently sick. Even water is going to kill you. You drink too much. Oxygen, too much. I mean, there's a healthy amount in the air, but still, the point is our existence right now is such that we need to constantly be on our toes, change the situation. We can never remain in the same place. I mean, if you think just lying in bed the whole day, that's true happiness, wow. At around 4 PM, you really want to get up, a backache or whatever. There's not a single state. If we just don't do anything, we'd be happier? No way. We're going to suffer. Isn't that fascinating? We have to be fascinating, I don't know, depressing, maybe a better way to describe it as depressing. But yeah, we have to constantly do something. We have to make an effort. I always work hard because the next problem is around the corner. Yeah, so being on our toes. So that's one disadvantage of what we call happiness. And then of course it's ridiculous in comparison to the degree of happiness a liberated person could experience. I mean, we like talk about bliss, like that's not bliss what we experience. Even the most blissful short moment, whatever it may be, that first bite of some delicious food when you're really, really hungry. That first bite is maybe blissful. The second is already, oh, okay. The third, number 105, right? So, therefore, it's ridiculous in comparison to what our mind can actually experience. But we have no taste of it, and so something worse, which we would call suffering, in comparison to that, it's better, so we call it happiness. But a bodhisattva on that level, I mean, they're already experiencing something, no surprise. On that level, it's called utmost joy or perfect joy, as Geshe Kelsang translates it. It translates it as perfect joy. So, all right, but why? Because now they've become ultimate bodhisattvas. Before reaching this ground, there are bodhisattva, of course, they're bodhisattvas by virtue of having generated what's called conventional bodhicitta, and having entered therefore the path of the universal vehicle. I mean, their lives have already dramatically changed. I mean, just having a mind that is so driven by great compassion. Why do we suffer so much? So much more than even an ordinary bodhisattva. Because we have a mind that is driven by self-centeredness. Self-cherishing is another way of calling. I don't even want to call it self-cherishing. There's nothing wrong with cherishing yourself. If there's nothing wrong with cherishing others, why would there be anything wrong with cherishing yourself? This is why some, even contemporary masters, I just read a commentary by, or just these few pages on cherishing ourselves by a master called Geshe Kelsang, and he says we should cherish ourselves. It's not about just cherishing ourselves. It's about cherishing ourselves at the exclusion of everyone else. So that's self-centeredness. Believing we are more important, we're more precious than everyone else. Our happiness is more important. Our, what else? Gain is more important. Our reputation is more important. Our praises, everything, our pleasant experience, all that is more important. So therefore, we'll try to bring that about. I mean, to make sure that we experience that, and if others, we have to harm others, okay. Oh, I forgot that one. Oh, sorry. Okay, now you can hear me better. All right, so it's better, isn't it? Forgot. So the point is, therefore, even the bodhisattva on the ordinary path, which are called the path of accumulation and path of preparation, when there's no direct realization of emptiness, it's already a huge difference, because their lives are controlled by that love and compassion. And the funny thing is, if we want ourselves to be happy, that wish we usually have, that is so exaggerated, leads to worry. Right? We're worried about not getting what we want and so forth. But having that love and compassion for all sentient beings, which is not attachment. You can't be attached towards all sentient beings. You can't be angry with all sentient beings, and you can't be attached to all sentient beings. It's quite limited. Compassion can be directed towards all sentient beings, but you can't have attachment towards all. And so therefore, there's no that kind of worry doesn't arise. You have sincere love, sincere compassion for sentient beings, and it's such a joyful state of mind, as they say. So the bodhisattvas, therefore, on that level already have incredible joy. But now they've even gone further, because at this level they've realized emptiness directly, while before their realization of emptiness was conceptual. When they therefore reach the first ground, when bodhisattvas reach the first ground, they attain what's called ultimate bodhicitta. We discussed it before or explained it before, and thereby become Arya bodhisattvas. Their designation as bodhisattva is now grounded not merely in aspiration or motivation, but in an irreversible transformation of realization. They've understood, they've experienced phenomena as they really are. They realize phenomena directly, emptiness directly, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. We talk a lot about emptiness. That only comes in the 6th chapter, but never mind. It's already mentioned quite frequently. So the ultimate nature of everything. For this reason, they should no longer be characterized using terms appropriate to ordinary beings, but exclusively by this meaningful title, Ultimate Bodhisattva. Okay. Then Lama Tsongkhapa continues saying, the commentary cites the Cloud of Jewels Sutra, where it states that someone on the great stage of supreme mundane Dharma, on the path of preparation, has not attained the ultimate Bodhisattva ground. So from this we can understand that the title Bodhisattva being designated here is in the sense of a specific meaning. All right, so there's this whole thing about when do you call someone a Bodhisattva or not. Anyway, the explanation of this short passage just now from Illuminating the Intent is this. So in this auto commentary always refers to the auto commentary on Acharya Chandrakirti's text, Entering the Middle Way, the main text we study. So he very kindly composed an auto commentary, so we know what he meant. Sometimes it's not that clear, maybe. So in his auto commentary, Acharya Chandrakirti cites the Cloud of Jewels Sutra. And this sutra states that even someone who has reached the highest stage of the supreme mundane Dharma on the path of preparation, so the highest stage of the path that immediately precedes the path of seeing, has not yet attained the ground of an ultimate Bodhisattva. So therefore the sutra confirms the preceding explanation that the term, and again this is very typical, you try to, as far as possible, cite a sutric source. So the Buddha, it's not like something someone made up, but this is terminology, it goes back to the Buddha himself, and so therefore here this sutra, the Cloud of Jewels Sutra, proves that. Or the citation of that sutra, it becomes clear that it goes back to the Buddha. So therefore this sutra confirms the preceding explanation that the term Bodhisattva in the 2 lines of Entering the Middle Way is used in a specific sense, referring exclusively to practitioners of the universal vehicle who have attained the path of seeing and thus the first ground. Okay. And then there's another quote, the perfection of wisdom in 25,000 lines. Now I'm reading again from Lama Tsongkhapa's text. I know it's like so technical, a lot of this stuff here, but what to do? I mean, I don't want to just skip it. So it's not hard to understand, but yeah, well, what to do? So how does one understand this? The Perfection of Wisdom in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 25,000 lines. Okay, just to tell you a little bit about Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Really important sutras. We learn that the most important sutras are those, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So there's so many, but they're considered to be, I mean, it's really hard to say, oh, this is more important than that. But at least from the point of view of studying the Dharma, we mainly study the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. There's a great author called Jamyang Shepa. He's famous for composing or having composed the textbooks of, for instance, the great monastery, the universal, the college, if you want, the monastic college of Drepung Gomang. Drepung Gomang, there's a particular subdivision of Drepung, which is one of the main 3 monasteries in the Gelug tradition. So he wrote the textbooks of this particular college. And in one of those commentaries he composed, in one of the texts he composed, he says, we study in this particular tradition 5 main texts. The 5 main subjects that are studied. And they all relate back to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. One subject we study for many years, 6-7 years, is the implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Now, before I say more, one example that you can come up with, one example of a Perfection of Wisdom Sutra that you all know, probably know. Can you come up with an example of a particular Perfection of Wisdom Sutra? The Heart Sutra. That's one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So there are different types of different length. 25,000 lines, is the one we're looking at here. Then there's, I don't know why the translator says lines, because usually it means stanzas, like verses. For some reason, Geshe Kelsang, the translator of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, he chose to say lines, but it's actually stanzas. And then there's a longer one. How many stanzas does that have? The longest that we know that has been translated into Tibetan? 100,000. Which one is the shortest? Ah. The syllable ah. The syllable ah. What? That seems easy to compose that sutra. No, but of course it goes back to the Buddha, to the time of the Buddha. All these sutras were given by the Buddha, taught by the Buddha himself. So what does ah symbolize? What does ah stand for?
Emptiness.
Emptiness? In what way? How does ah mean emptiness?
It's empty, no?
I mean, you're totally right. Ah.
When you negate something, no?
So ah negates something.
No?
A doesn't. Does a? Yeah, a. Even in English. The
sorry, I should.
asocial.
Cross that out.
What did you say? No. Now I'm curious. After you say cross it out. No, but for instance, asocial, right?
Yeah.
Abnormal. Okay, you've got AB, but never mind. But yeah, like so. This is, I guess, from the language. Well, they say that the source language for Latin, for instance, so in the European language, English and you know the Latin kind of based languages, well, they all come from the Latin, and Latin in turn, as well as Sanskrit, have an origin. Like there's another kind of Indo whatever language, right? Another language of India that preceded Sanskrit, and a lot of the words actually, they originate from that. Okay, so there are lots of words like the, a being like often used to negate something. It's one example, but there's so many examples. Like the English word. Remember we talked about the English word nightmare. What does it mean? Night mara. So like some mara, some demon, like some evil force that comes at night. So nightmare, night mara. Pajama anyway. Pajama, and I think it's veranda. Those are, I mean, they're even used in, as far as I know, in Hindi as well. But they...
Tamil.
Pardon?
Tamil words, pajama and veranda.
Pepper as well, I've heard. Right? Yes, because in Tamil Nadu they grow a lot of pepper apparently, and so it's called pepper. So we've got a lot of pepper. Yes, yeah. So a lot of I've also had like Tamil Nadu expressions that we also use in English. I can't think of all of them, but there's so many of them. Like if you look them up, you find okay Latin, but then go back all the way. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is here. Indicates a negation. A negation, in this case, it's said that the Buddha, when some of his disciples, their minds were ready, he just said, and that implied the negation. It implied the negation of what? Inherent existence, intrinsic existence. Yes. So therefore, that's the shortest Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. But here it's a longer type. And Jamyang Chepa, what did he say? We study the implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras for about 7 years. We study the explicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is emptiness. The implicit meaning is the different meditational path, the different methods we have to apply to become fully enlightened. That's the implicit meaning. We study that over 6 years. Over 3 years, around 3 years, sometimes longer, we study the explicit meaning, which is this text we're studying here. This is exactly the text we study over 3 years. Then the logic, we study the logic that is important to understand the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras by studying epistemology and logic. We study the phenomenology, the different phenomena, different categories and so forth of phenomena when we study Abhidharmakosha. And the kind of discipline we should keep in order to be able to study and internalize this effectively, well, that we study when we study the Vinaya, the kind of monastic rules, basically, or the rules of ethical conduct we should abide by in order to effectively, well, study this, reflect on it, and meditate on it. So, as the great Jamyang Chepa says, it all revolves around these sutras, this particular genre. Anyway, so what does it say here? What does Lama Tsongkhapa say, quoting this particular Perfection of Wisdom Sutra? How does one understand this? Regarding things that have not yet come into being, those that have not perfectly come into being, and those that have ceased, they relate to these not in a manner imputed by childish ordinary beings, nor in a manner obtained by childish ordinary beings. Therefore, they are called bodhisattvas. Is that clear? No. It's a little difficult. In Tibetan, it's even more difficult. Geshe Kelsang did an incredible job. The Tibetan version of this text is really not easy. So he did an incredible job, but of course, in order to be faithful to the translation, it's still difficult in English as well. What the above conveys indirectly is that bodhisattvas find the suchness of these phenomena just as in the manner found by the Aryas. Here too, the intended referent is ultimate bodhisattvas. This sutra passage is not suggesting there are no genuine bodhisattvas on the stages of ordinary beings. Okay, and now to explain this, so another passage supporting the meaningful title, now being called Bodhisattvas, as was mentioned before, appears in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, in the Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines. This sutra explains that bodhisattvas do not realize the ultimate nature of phenomena in the same way that childish ordinary beings do. Kind of harsh. Ordinary is okay, but childish, I mean, they've realized emptiness, obviously. So it's like, oh, it's so interesting how sometimes, in the West, we're so PC. Well, Tibetans are not. I mean, they of course, they don't want to hurt each other and so forth. I've said that many times. But they don't really give the same weight to certain words, like you call someone old and it's okay. You don't have to describe everyone as elderly, just, I say jokingly, there are no longer any old people. You're like 95 and you're still elderly. It's almost like an insult, which is terrible. The fact that being old is an insult, that's just a weird society that's obsessive with youth, honestly. I mean, it's really sad, actually. No, Tibetan's old. You're old. Okay. I told you about all the nicknames we got. Some of you don't know my nickname yet. I had a great nickname in my class. Monkey Bum. Because, especially when I first came here, my face was so red. I lived with nuns and they were always scrubbing their faces with this cheap soap, so I wanted to be like them, so I did the same thing. But instead of looking clean, I looked red. So I looked like the bum of a monkey. So Monkey Bum. Yeah, it was fine. First I was a little upset, but no, it's just a word. One of my classmates was called Acne. It's like, I don't know, maybe mine was better. But the point is really here. The point is saying childish, ordinary beings. I mean, in a way, it's of course not meant in an abusive way. It's just saying, in comparison to those who realize emptiness only conceptually, it's childish. It's like childlike. Whereas a person who's directly realized, have directly experienced emptiness, I mean, that's what we're aiming for. So ordinary beings understand the lack of intrinsic existence only conceptually, whereas bodhisattvas directly realize suchness, whether phenomena have not yet arisen, are presently arising, or have already ceased. Bodhisattvas directly realize their suchness in a way that ordinary beings just are not capable of. So that kind of have not yet arisen, are presently arising, or have already ceased. So the 3 times. You'll notice a lot about the 3 times, past, present, and future. So some scholars explain that this passage indicates the 3 doors of liberation. The 3 doors of liberation. The door of liberation of signlessness, the door of liberation of emptiness, and the door of liberation of wishlessness. Don't ask me why they call that. I really don't know. But it's not that difficult to understand. The terminology is unusual. And I'm pretty sure there's an explanation, but it's not that obvious, I believe. Okay, what is the door of liberation of signlessness? It's a different word for emptiness. So the lack of intrinsic existence. We'll have quite a bit of discussion from the group. Some people put some nice comments in there about existing from its own side, existing intrinsically. Intrinsically is fine, we use that ordinarily, but something existing from its own size or not existing, basically, right? So it's all about emptiness, and yeah, here I just describe it briefly as the lack of intrinsic existence. But of what? Of the causes of something, the causes that give rise to something. So the causes, when you talk about the causes of something, it is that which has not yet arisen, right? So the lack of inherent existence of the causes of something is the cause of that which has not yet arisen. Now when we say, for instance, this table doesn't exist intrinsically, to really understand that it doesn't exist in and of itself, it's dependent on so many factors. In fact, if we were to leave these factors that it's dependent on, it wouldn't even exist. It couldn't exist. But it seems to us it's a table, almost like shouting out, look at me, I'm a table. The fact that we call it a table is because it is one, and not the other way around. That's how it feels, right? It's not a table because we call it that. No, we call it a table because it is one. It's the direct opposite. So there's something there that makes this a table from its own side. Well, we get more into this as part of the question and answer. But the point is, therefore, understanding that the table doesn't exist in such an independent way includes understanding that the causes of this table don't exist in that way, and that which the table gives rise to also doesn't exist in that way. So to gain a complete understanding, it's important, where does it come from and where does it go? Okay, very important idea in Buddhism. So it's like, for us it's overwhelming enough just to think about the table, but we have to also understand it came into existence, it's dependently arisen, and it gives rise to something else. Okay, so the door of liberation of signlessness concerns the emptiness or the lack of intrinsic existence of the causes that give rise to things. Then the door of liberation of emptiness concerns the lack of inherent existence of the things themselves, so the table itself. And the door of liberation of wishlessness concerns the lack of intrinsic existence of the results of things. Okay, so those things that have not yet come into being concerns the causes. Those that have not perfectly come into being. Perfectly here means intrinsically. So they have not intrinsically come into being is that which exists now. It has come into being, but not perfectly. And then those that have ceased, those words, those that have ceased, means the table has ceased, it's no longer there, but it has given rise to its own effect. Right? The result of the table cannot be there unless the table is gone. In particular, this particular table right now, for its result to come into existence, this table must be gone. Because cause and effect, cause and result don't exist at the same time. This is all stuff we're going to go through later on, but it's already mentioned here by way of these 3 types of emptiness. Implicit here is that the bodhisattva being described, or the bodhisattvas that are described here, are those who realize the suchness of phenomena in the way Aryas do. Okay. Okay, so the way Aryas realize things were very different. Thus, the passage refers to ultimate bodhisattvas, those who have directly realized emptiness upon attaining the first ground and beyond. Okay, so if we go back to what Lama Tsongkhapa says, really Lama Tsongkhapa is basically saying, well, they all realize the causes of something, they lack inherent existence. The actual something lacks inherent existence, and its result does too. But the quality of realization is so different. Therefore, bodhisattvas, Arya bodhisattvas, they are the ones that deserve to receive this title. So accordingly, the Cloud of Jewels Sutra explicitly uses the term ultimate bodhisattva, while both the Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines and Entering the Middle Way just use the term bodhisattva, saying now you can call this person bodhisattva. But they use the term bodhisattva in a restricted sense, not denying that all who have cultivated conventional bodhicitta are bodhisattvas, but they identify those who have entered the first ground and directly realized emptiness. Yeah, anyway, it's a lot of explanation here for something that you probably understood already. But again, this is just the style of writing. You quote the sutras and emphasize, we're not saying that those on the path of accumulation, preparation are not bodhisattvas, but we say they're ultimate bodhisattvas. Okay. And then next, there are 4 qualities. This was the quality of being given that meaningful title. And now the text continues by saying there are 4 further qualities, such as being born in the lineage. So verse 6 outlines a further 4 qualities that beautify a bodhisattva who has reached the first ground. And this is now divided in terms of verses. Previously, we went through the last 2 lines of verse 5. As you can see from the numbering of the verses are always in blue letters. And then the next verse, next verse is verse number 6. And the first line reads, he is born into the lineage of the Tathagatas as well. Okay, so that's the first quality of being born in the lineage of the Tathagatas. What does that even mean? We really don't talk like that in English usually. It's like, wow, they've achieved such and such state, they've been born into a lineage. That whole lineage thing, the lineage of the Tathagatas. But Lama Tsongkhapa explains it. He says, furthermore, this bodhisattva who abides on the first ground, who's reached the first ground, because he has gone well beyond all the grounds of an ordinary person, as well as those of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, or practitioners of the foundational vehicle, and because the path that is certain to lead to the ground of Buddhahood has arisen within his mental continuum, is born into the lineage of the Tathagatas as well. No longer embarking on another path, this lineage is confirmed within this path. Okay, so what does this mean? What does Lama Tsongkhapa say here? There are 4 qualities described in verse 6. And of these 4 qualities, the first is expressed in the opening line. The bodhisattvas are born into the lineage of the Tathagatas. So Tathagatas is another word for Buddhas. They have now been born into the lineage of the Buddhas. This means that once bodhisattvas reach the first ground, not only have they surpassed the levels of ordinary beings, but also the attainments of hearers and solitary realizers. They've now surpassed those on the foundational vehicle. At this point, the path leading unfailingly to Buddhahood has arisen in their mind stream, because they're fully established in the family or spiritual heritage of the Buddhas. They are described as born into the lineage of the Tathagatas. So their course is set. They will not take up other paths, such as those of hearers and solitary realizers, but will remain firmly within this lineage. Okay, that seems to make sense. First, they get this special title, they're no longer ordinary. Secondly, they have now surpassed hearers and solitary realizers. So right away there's a debate. Previously they haven't surpassed hearers and solitary realizers? Just the fact that they have bodhicitta Doesn't that mean because they have this attitude, they have this altruistic mind that takes personal responsibility? So to think back, of course, great compassion, we discussed it so much in the very beginning, taking personal responsibility for the welfare of all sentient beings, not only wishing for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes, but there's something else that Lama Tsongkhapa stresses. He says they wish to personally contribute to that, wish to personally help sentient beings overcome suffering and its causes. And bodhicitta is really just a means to that. Great compassion is much more important. A means to fulfilling that aspiration that comes along with great compassion is to wish for enlightenment. And I said before, if to fulfill this wish was something else, I don't know, becoming a dentist, they would want to become a dentist. Of course, it's absurd to think that becoming a dentist, you can benefit all. I mean, you can benefit sentient beings to some degree, of course. But I'm just saying, if that was a means to accomplishing the welfare of all sentient beings, that's what they would aim for. But in this case, of course, it's Buddhahood, and therefore they generate bodhicitta. But anyway, having now reached that particular level of a bodhisattva, they are said to surpass hearers and solitary realizers, but also very important, they will not take up other paths. But in this context, a debate arises. So I actually started now with giving debates. I haven't done that so far, actually. So I was thinking, why am I not including some debates? You're not debating, yes, maybe not, but at least you know some of the debates that would ordinarily happen on the debate ground. So now the debate here, take the quality, or a lot of people say take the quality, or regarding the quality. So regarding the quality of having, I don't really put it exactly in but basically it's the way it's formulated. So regarding the subject, it's usually added, not always, but some people add it. So regarding the quality of having been born into the lineage of the Tathagatas, okay? It follows that this is not an exclusive quality of bodhisattvas who have attained the first ground. Lama Tsongkhapa says it is. Right? He says, being born is in the lineage of the Tathagatas, that is. So a bodhisattva on the path of seeing has reached this quality. And the debate would then be, no, that's not true. I mean, in the debate you question everything. You should question everything. It's very much encouraged. So if that's what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, I don't agree. So regarding the quality of having been born into the lineage of the Tathagatas, it follows that this is not an exclusive quality of bodhisattvas who've attained the first ground, since bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation also possess it. If we respond that the reason is not established, namely that this quality is not found on the path of accumulation and preparation, I should add preparation, I forgot, and preparation, it follows the opponent advances. No, if I were to answer now, no, this is not true, this quality you don't find on the path of accumulation and preparation, then the opponent continues saying, regarding the quality of having been born into the lineage of the Tathagatas, it follows that it is present on the path of accumulation because it has been attained on the middling level of that path. Remember, we went through the different levels. The middling level, at that point, bodhisattvas attain gold-like bodhicitta. Do you remember? We went through it. So on the smaller path of the path of accumulation, bodhisattvas do such and such. They work on emptiness and so forth. But on the middling level, they must have realized emptiness, and they attain what's called gold-like bodhicitta, which according to the scriptural sources is a conventional awakening mind that cannot degenerate. Right? We've heard, cannot degenerate. And ensures that such bodhisattvas will never regress to the path of hearers and solitary realizers. So big deal, they already attained that. Right? So what's going on? Lama Tsongkhapa says on this level they have reached the lineage of the Tathagatas, they've surpassed hearers and solitary realizers, and more importantly, they can no longer enter the path of accumulation, the path of preparation. but that already happened before. Therefore, if non-regression occurs at the middling stage of the path of accumulation, the path of accumulation precedes the path of seeing. So you have first the path of accumulation. You enter as a bodhisattva. Becoming a bodhisattva is simultaneous to reaching the path of accumulation. Then from there you move on to the path of preparation. And from there you reach the first ground, or the path of seeing, which we're looking at right now. And as we've learned during the middle, and so the path of accumulation has a smaller section, or smaller phase, a middling, and a larger or a greater phase, yeah. So, So in those different phases, so in the period, the middling period, they can no longer lose bodhicitta, it's said. That's pretty soon, isn't it? Quite impressive, actually. You would think like, well, you know, they're stuck with like that danger of falling down again. But no, it's actually quite fast. Not everyone agrees, to be honest, but the texts are very clear. The facts are quite clear. Geshe Kelsang doesn't agree. I was quite surprised to hear. You remember Geshe Kelsang? Yeah. So he once told me, I was with him on the phone, I asked him a question, and he said, no, he doesn't agree. But actually the texts say gold leg bodhicitta cannot degenerate. So there are different views on that. But you don't always have to agree what the texts say, by the way. You should question everything. Yeah, you should question. And if it's not logical, you can... It seems a bit like, whoa, I thought I'd teach, you know, this is cut in stone. It's no. First of all, we know a lot of what the Buddha said can't be taken literally, because he taught according to the needs and the predispositions of people. And just as we learned in school, you know, in elementary school, I always give the same example. I mean, please come with some better examples. But I remember in first grade, we learned about what happens to our teeth if we don't brush them. And I remember very clearly watching that cartoon with the little guys in my teeth, and I ate some, you know, the person in the cartoon ate some sugar, and they had these, I always forget what they're called in English, slash hammers. Yeah, these slash hammers, and they were just drilling away at that person's teeth. So for quite a while, I was pretty stressed out every time I had something sweet, and I couldn't give up the sweets. But I had this image of these guys with their slash hammers, you know, hammering away at my teeth. So of course that was not literally true, but it was just a way to teach someone like me that, you know, well, if you eat a lot of sugar, at least brush your teeth. So the point is, it's not literally true, but on my level, that was really helpful to understand it. Not that I didn't have a lot of slash hammering going on in my mouth, but never mind. But the point is still, you know, like the stuff we learn, especially in the very beginning, can't be always taken literally. And I'm sure you've got other examples of, like, I don't know, flowers talking to each other and pollination and whatever, right? I mean, of course, pollination takes place, but they don't talk. So the point is, therefore, when the Buddha taught, it's a similar scenario. When he first taught certain philosophers, for instance, who held certain very strong views, well, he taught according to their needs. Of course, taught certain aspects that could be taken literally true, or could be taken literally, that were literally true, but other aspects that just he taught provisionally to make their minds more flexible, in order to then later on either personally continue to teach them and then, you know, move away from that provisional teaching, or have others do so. So it's not about like fooling people. It's basically about saying, okay, you know, for you right now, I teach you such and such. And that is the challenge, therefore, of the Buddha's teachings, to recognize what can be taken literally and what cannot. This is a huge subject, like literal teachings, definitive teachings, non-definitive teaching, or teachings that you can take literally or not, provisional versus definitive, and so on. But we have a great tool. There's one tool that's very effective to recognizing what can be taken literally, and that's logic. That is reasoning, logical reasoning. If the Buddha says one thing in one situation and something else in a different situation, we can't take everything literally. So one example is, for instance, I don't even know the Buddha said it, but let's say the Buddha did it. In some occasions, he said to some people, well, to become enlightened, you should be a man. But then in other occasions, he stressed very much there's no difference. So what can we take literally? Maybe there was some, I don't want to be disrespectful, but some misogynist disciple, and they wouldn't have followed the Buddha's teachings if they didn't hear that kind of view. They wouldn't have followed the teachings, because at the time when the Buddha taught, this was not a good time for women. Previously, historically, there was a time before the Brahmanistic tradition became very, very, very prevalent. There was a time when women had a lot of rights, a lot of opportunities, but then it slowly changed. And I think it was the Brahmanistic kind of tradition. I could be wrong about this, the terminology, but as far as I understand, because I've once had to write a paper on this, it changed again, and women were basically under the control, if you like. I mean, they were under their fathers, and then their brothers, and then their husbands, and then their sons. And so the Buddha came along and ordained women. That was probably one of the first female club, if you had, like self-governing kind of body of just women being together. And that was revolutionary for that time. But to us, it doesn't seem that great. And when the Buddha first refused, I've said that many times, when he first refused to actually ordain women, it may seem like the Buddha himself was misogynist. But women, if they ordained and changed their minds, gave back their vows, they could not go home. Different to the men. I mean, it's like that even to this day. If you get married and you don't want to leave, you want to leave your husband, in some traditional households, you can't go back. You won't be able to go back. This is no longer your home. And that was definitely true also at the time of the Buddha. So the women had to be a lot more determined and be sure this is what they want to do in order not to end up being homeless. So it needs to be also taken into the context of that time, the tradition, the customs, and so forth. And there were definitely a lot of people who felt women were inferior all over the world. Still, I mean, it's still, sure, like even in modern countries, sure, there's that view. To tell you something, when people ask me, do you think Tibetans are misogynist? I say no, not as bad as some of the Westerners. I had my fair share of some of the Western Buddhists that are sometimes worse than the Tibetans. Yeah, some monks, and not, but some. I've had some no Tibetan monk has ever said the things to me that I've heard from them. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, Tibetans, yeah, they have certain traditions, but they've never wanted to stop me from my studies or anything. No, the opposite, they always supported it. So it's not something that goes back in the olden days and it's just Asian. No, it's all over the world, right? And I know that I experienced that because I was a misogynist person and I have these experiences talking about karma. So, it doesn't even bother me that much. I created the causes and conditions myself. But I had these experiences. And so the point is, therefore, going back to this here, the Buddha may have taught this to certain beings, to certain, right? Like, okay, women, but can't take literally. You can't take that literally because he's very clearly said, men and women equally. Think of the Heart Sutra. In response to the question, how should the son of the daughter, how should the son of the lineage practice? That's how Shariputra asked, right? And then Avalokiteshvara says, any son or daughter of the lineage. I don't like, in some of the versions of the Heart Sutra, when they change the question of Shariputra, they say, how should a son or daughter of the lineage practice? Some people try to adjust it. The traditional version of that sutra that I'm familiar with in Tibetan definitely says, Shariputra asks Avalokiteshvara, how should a son of the lineage practice? And then Avalokiteshvara says, every son or daughter. It emphasizes, oh, don't you think it's just sons? And I really like how the Tibetans recite it. They say Riki Pumo Kalala. So they always emphasize the Riki Pumo. It's oftentimes the tune is such, every son and every daughter of the lineage. Yeah, so there are certain teachings, yes, where the male is kind of emphasized, but it was for the predisposition directed at certain people. But here Avalokiteshvara says, in the name of the Buddha, everyone can do this, right? So very important. Okay, therefore, having heard this, we have a personal responsibility to question. And it's okay to say, Namatsangkapa, no, he's contradicting himself. That's not disrespectful. In the end, you come up with your own view, but yeah. So anyway, having said all this, so regarding the quality of having been born in the lineage of the Tathagatas, it follows that it's present on the path of accumulation because it has been attained on the middling level of that path. At that point, bodhisattvas attain gold-like bodhicitta, which according to scriptural sources is a conventional awakening mind that cannot degenerate and ensures that such bodhisattva will never regress to the path of hearers or solitary realizers. Therefore, if non-regression occurs at the middling stage of the path of accumulation, birth into the lineage of the Tathagatas would already have been attained at that point. This means that it cannot serve as a distinguishing quality exclusive to bodhisattvas who've reached the first ground. So what? Now what? Minus one quality. Not an exclusive quality. If we agree that being born into the lineage of the Tathagatas is not an exclusive quality of the bodhisattvas who've attained the first ground, this contradicts illuminating the intent. Later, a few pages down the line, it states, so it's page 82 in the Kindle edition of Illuminating the Intent. For instance, it was mentioned above that birth in the lineage of the Tathagatas is from the first ground onwards. It just says is from the first ground, but it actually says from the first ground onward. Why would you say that if it was already there before? So it's very clear, that statement, more so in Tibetan, actually means from that point onwards, you've attained this quality. Now I'll give you what some of the scholars, I'll tell you what some of the scholars say, but you should still debate it, because it's too, for us at this level, it's like, everything starts becoming shaky. So there is a certain way of looking at it. Some scholars, they try to resolve this is apparent, not appearance contradiction, this apparent contradiction. Sorry, I keep finding mistakes. I'll send you the edited version later on. Some scholars try to resolve this apparent contradiction by proposing a distinction. Although attaining gold-like bodhicitta prevents a bodhisattva from regressing to a foundational path or Hinayana path, only upon reaching the first ground and thereby eliminating the three binding factors, we'll come to that, what are the three binding factors, do they acquire a special irreversible stability described as being born into the lineage of the Buddhas or the Tathagatas. Whether this distinction is sufficient, however, remains open to debate, right? So this is something that you hear in class, for instance, like when we are taught to debate. Some teachers would say, okay, there is kind of a difference. The special stability is attained. And so that means, therefore, and of course it makes perfect sense. You become more and more, your realizations become more and more stable. So even you may not regress to the foundational vehicle, but the danger might be graver, might be greater, right? Like, sentient beings are so obnoxious. What did I do? So maybe it never goes as far as like really giving it up, but you don't have to give it up. You could be stuck, especially in the beginning. You can get stuck. So you don't really give up bodhicitta, but you don't progress as quickly. I talked about this before. Again, I quote Geshe Kelsang, this incredible Geshe that some of you may know. So he has once said, when we start off practicing in the beginning, so this is really just us, it's like getting on a bicycle and riding through a jungle with roots and potholes and obstacles everywhere, right? There's no real road and you fall off the bike and you get up again. That's how it feels, right? When we start first practicing the Dharma, our mind just doesn't want it, what we want it to do. Doesn't go along with what we want it to do, basically. Put it in that way. So our mind is controlled. We have no control over our mind because our mind is controlled by the afflictions. And we want to meditate on emptiness, and it's scary, and it's like, oh, what's going on? We really want to, we have the best intention, but it's so difficult. But then slowly, it's kind of like you leave that jungle and you get into a kind of less jungly forest. And then slowly you get a different vehicle. It's no longer that weird bicycle, that old bicycle, but it's like maybe like a mountain bike. And eventually you reach the highway and you get into a car and So I guess there's this progression. For us in the beginning, it's really like we keep falling off. But then even when you enter the Bodhisattva path, there's still a lot of obstacles. There'll be obstacles. And sometimes people wonder, like some of the Rinpoches, there's some high Rinpoches. Of course, not every Rinpoche is the same level as, you don't even know whether they're really Rinpoche. Sometimes they're recognized because it's beneficial for people. But in general, like the ones that are more known, they're pretty advanced. But we don't know what level. We never know. They could be on the path of seeing, but they might as well also be on one of the lower levels, being bodhisattvas. And they may act in a really curious way. Like sometimes, I don't know, as young people, I should say young guys, because they're usually guys, but they, in a strange way, and we're like, oh my God, so degenerate. But they could just manifest that, of course, but they could also be, there's an obstacle in that particular life of that person. Because not every truku, despite the name truku, which is kind of means emanation body of a Buddha, no, they're actually possibly on the path. So we expect them all to be Buddhas. That puts a lot of pressure on them. And it's not realistic. Some of them are, many of them are. Believing that they are, with very strong faith, benefits us. But it's very dangerous, because we can lose that faith. But as Lama Zopa Rinpoche has said very beautifully, if we have a Lama who we trust, we've really entrusted ourselves to this Lama, and we believe them to be a Buddha, even if they're not, we get the full benefit of a Buddha. But that is very difficult if they behave in a way, and usually it's not really terrible. It's not like, oh my God, but they seem to be interested in their mobile phones and like when we watch that. But we can't judge a book by its cover kind of idea. We don't know. But even if there is not that much interest in the Dharma for some time maybe in their life, it makes sense because they're not on the 10th ground of a Bodhisattva yet or Buddhas. So it's very important, and Tibetans have a beautiful way to deal with that. They don't have all these expectations. They're very respectful, just in case. They're always respectful, just in case. But then if there's something happen, they don't lose that respect. They look at the positive aspect more, but maybe not follow that person to such a degree. By the way, this is also a way in which they manage to have respect for monks and nuns, even if sometimes they misbehave. There are sometimes, like I know from the nunnery that I live in, there was a nun, she's no longer there, but she has some mental problems. Unfortunately, she has some mental issues. So when she got ordained, that wasn't obvious, I suppose, but it's later on manifested very strongly. And she sometimes misbehaves so badly because of her mental, she's actually banned now from the temple. She cannot go to the temple. So none of you will know, so never mind. But the Tibetans, she's had fights during the teachings. I've never seen it myself, but the other nuns told me. But first of all, she has a mental problem, what to do. And then the Tibetans are still very respectful. Why are they respectful? They respect the vows. They don't, You see, like the way we look at a person, for us, this person is now defined by that action. All there is that action. But she has always kept her vows purely. That's for certain. I don't think she's ever done anything. No, she does, and I've lived with her for many years. She's never done anything that made me believe she's not kept her vows purely. She just gets really, really angry and throws a tantrum. That's the thing. And she believes people think she's a thief. She's got this thing about thief. Though she doesn't steal, but she believes other people accuse her of being a thief. So it's some kind of psychotic kind of situation. But the point is, they are still respectful towards her because she has vows. I really like that. I think it's really beautiful to not judge the person by a particular action, but look at the person, at the positive qualities. And in this case, it's the vows. And if we know someone a little better, oftentimes we don't like them, we dislike them because of a certain action, but to focus on the positive aspect. Okay. Anyway, I'm going a little bit off here today. I do this on purpose because it's a little bit dry. I want to get more to the, I don't want to say the juicy bits. I mean, this is, I find that pretty juicy, but I'm not sure you agree. So, yeah, anyway. All right, so the point is this, so I don't even know how I got here, but the point is that these scholars, some scholars, they here present a particular way of dealing with this apparent contradiction and, well, may still debate it. Okay, and then there is the second quality of eliminating what are called the three binding factors. Now this is, I don't want to say juicy, but that's probably less abstract, hopefully. So, since on the first ground, Lama Tsongkhapa says, so he has utterly purged the three binding factors. This is of course Acharya Chandakirti talking about a particular quality, and then Lama Tsongkhapa explains this to mean, since on the first ground, the Bodhisattva directly, the Bodhisattva directly perceives the selflessness of persons, that the person lacks existence by virtue of its own characteristic, he has utterly purged the three binding factors. What are these three binding factors? The identity view, the tendency to doubt, and the grasping at false views as supreme, and at inferior discipline and conduct as superior. That is, they will no longer arise for him. This indicates that their seeds, the potential of those arising, have been relinquished, and that the identity view referred to here is the acquired kind, which is an object of elimination on the path of seeing and not the innate one. You know, I know it's really hard to understand. Okay, now what is the second quality? And this is what's really important. The second quality presented in verse 6 is that bodhisattvas start to eliminate afflictions. They start to eliminate stuff from their mental consciousness, afflictions, mental afflictions, which really make a difference. Lama Tsongkhapa explains that since on this first ground, bodhisattvas have attained the meditative equipoise, directly realizing the emptiness or selflessness of all phenomena, and thereby also the selflessness of persons, this non-dual gnosis eliminates what are called the three binding factors. So, in other words, now realizing emptiness directly, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean an ordinary mind. It's a very focused mind. It's called a meditative equipoise. It's a meditative absorption. Remember, we talked about it's non-dual. Why is it non-dual? Remember? What does non-dual mean? Think water. Yeah, Tomer?
There's no distinction between object and subject, like water being pulled into water?
Yeah, there's no sense from the perspective of that mind, the mind that is absorbed into emptiness, there's no distance, there's no separation between the mind and its object. Ordinarily, when we look at things, there's kind of like almost like a self-awareness, like, oh, here's my mind perceiving this apple or whatever, right? So a sense of distance between the mind and its object. But I'm pretty sure we all have found ourselves, I think in English it's called a flow, in a situation where you're in a flow, where you're like totally absorbed into something and you forget everything around you. So it's almost like the mind becomes what it's doing. It's not really becoming that. But here it's an even more intense state where the mind is totally absorbed into emptiness. There's no sense of separation. The mind that perceives emptiness and emptiness itself. Rather, it's like water being poured into water. It's almost like the mind becomes emptiness, which of course it doesn't. Does that make sense? So that's a non-dual kind of mind. That kind of meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness. And we learn more about this, how this works and so forth. But anyway, emptiness and selflessness mean the same thing. In this particular school, the highest school, so they've realized the emptiness or selflessness of all phenomena, and thereby also the selflessness of persons. Which means this non-dual gnosis eliminates what are called the three binding factors. Intellectually acquired identity view, afflictive doubt, and holding inferior morality and spiritual conduct as superior. Yeah, I have to look at, anyway, yeah, I don't think I made a mistake. So the intellectually acquired, first, what is this intellectually acquired identity view? What does that even mean? We've covered it during the first part, but let's go through it again because it's easily forgotten. So the identity view refers to the misconception that grasps at the intrinsic existence of our own I or mine, and not at the inherent existence of others or what is theirs. So, first of all, we hold on to all phenomena existing inherently. Whatever, first of all, appears to exist independent in and of itself, out there, objectively existent. But of course, I'm not thinking of everything at the same time. Sometimes I'm thinking of myself, sometimes I'm thinking of others, sometimes I'm thinking of immaterial objects. Not material objects, not immaterial, material objects, something I'm thinking of my mind. So at times I perceive myself to exist inherently. And then other people to exist inherently. Like if you do something that harms me or benefits me, if I have anger towards you, there's a sense you exist inherently. I hold on to your inherent existence. If I have attachment towards you, again, you to me, you exist inherently. But that is not called identity view. The identity view is when I hold myself, when I hold onto my own I and what is mine to exist inherently. That is said to be actually more of a problem. Simply because my identity view, holding on to the inherent existence of myself, gives rise to attachment to myself. Holding on to your inherent existence doesn't necessarily give rise to attachment to you. Do you see the difference? If I perceive, first of all, there is an I that exists. Don't get fooled by the word selflessness. It is not saying the I doesn't exist. Of course you exist, I exist, everyone exists. But when I perceive of myself, when I focus on my own I, I'm not aware that it's merely labeled. Instead, to me, it seems to exist in and of itself, in the sense that it's just there. It doesn't require a mind to be there, it's just there. And the fact that I perceive it is because it's there in the first place. I have a very strong sense it is independently existent, something very concrete, solid. That's my sense of an I. And that sense of my I gives rise to a mind that believes this I is more precious than your I. Even though I believe you also have such an inherent I, but the mind that believes that feels closer to this I and further distant from your I, so it's attached to this I, considers this to be more precious. And that's how I end up with self-centeredness. I feel this I is more important than anyone else's. I exaggerate its mode of existence, so it's not just conventionally I call this I on the basis of this mind and body. No. I call it I because it's already there. Independent of me calling it whatever, it's already there. There's a strong sense it's there. It doesn't need anything to be there. And that exaggerated version of the I leads to an exaggerated sense of its importance. Once you exaggerate all the way. So first of all, it seems to be more concrete than it actually is, and that makes it more important than yours. More important, more precious. And what happens is, then I grow attached to it. My I, its happiness, its popularity, its gain, its, everything like I consider positive, its happiness most importantly. Yeah. So therefore, this identity view that focuses in particular on my own self is something to watch out. If I didn't have that, if I only had the view of inherent existence, I doubt we'd have self-centeredness. Of course, it's impossible to imagine you believe something exists, inherently existent, but something else doesn't. How would that work? But hypothetically, if I didn't have the sense that there's an inherently existent I doubt I could have self-centeredness. How would that work? So anyway, this is why this particular type of grasping at inherent existence gets a special name, gets a separate name. There's no term for my mind grasping at the inherent existence of Kumpen, just self-grasping. Doesn't get another name, right? It's just called grasping at inherent existence of person. But when you hold on to the inherent existence of a specific person, this one here, which is the center of the universe, it gets a specific name. Okay. So that's the identity view. It's also known as the view of the transitory collection. I followed this, I added this because of what Thomas said once to me. Thomas said he doesn't like the word identity view. I was really raving about the term identity view for a while. I thought, that's a great word. And then Thomas said, well, he likes the word view of the transitory collection because it's like you have no idea what it means. So you're really curious about learning what it's all about. Identity view we can kind of understand, but it doesn't mean anything like identity view in ordinary sense anyway. And then later on I thought, I mean, the view of identity is very different to the view of self, right? My grasping onto inherent existence is not the same as my view of who I am. First I grasp onto an inherently existent self, and then I believe this I is inherently this and inherently that. So all the characteristics that I keep labeling and believe to be inherently mine, they make up the identity view. That's different, isn't it? Like my identity is actually the sum of the thoughts, I'm like this. So if I'm good at cooking, I label I'm a cook. If I'm bad at repairing cars, that's part of my identity. So I have this thought, I'm not good at this. So I build up my own identity, these thoughts based on something. I label this, that, and the other. That's okay. And the sum of all these are my identity. Then, of course, I add that inherent existence. I make it more concrete than it is. But the identity view does not deal with who I think I am, all the different characteristics. It deals, first of all, with that I that holds these characteristics that I perceive to exist inherently. Oops. This thing is on, right? The continues running. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the internet still seems to... Yeah, it's working. Yes, the lights are on. Okay. All right, let me just put on my little... last time we had Leon doing it. That's such a good idea. Now I know how to do it. Put the spotlight on me. There we go. All right, can you see me? Me? Okay. So I put the light up on here as well. Just, it's basically for the recording. Okay, so therefore, I liked what Thomas said basically. So the view of the transitory collection, which is a literal translation actually of the Tibetan term, Jitsulatawa, Satkaya Drishti in Sanskrit. I looked it up, Satkaya Drishti. It doesn't really mean the view of the transitory collection. I think it means more the view of the real body, Satkaya, I think. But anyway, Jitsola Dawa is the Tibetan term, and that is just, it's sometimes translated as the view of the transitory collection. So the reason for this latter term, view of the transitory collection, is that it apprehends the intrinsic existence of our I or mind on the basis of our transitory or impermanent psychophysical aggregates. So the view of the transitory collection is a view that arises from seeing this impermanent collection of mind and body. This impermanent connection of mind and body. On the basis of that, we have a view of a solid I. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's the reason for calling it that. But I'll continue calling it identity view, because otherwise it gets too confusing with Geshe Jumba's translation. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. So what is the identity view here? Also called view of the transitory collection. So identity view here means specifically focusing on the conventional I, however exaggerating its actual existence by perceiving it to exist inherently, intrinsically, independently. Okay. There are two forms of this view. Two forms. One is innate and one is acquired. Innate and acquired. What is innate? It arises naturally. It arises naturally in us, in sentient beings. It's not learned from culture, religion, science, philosophy, or any other external influence, but it's inborn. Yeah, we're all born with it. Bad news. Yeah, we're not born as blank sheets. No. We were very much born with that kind of view. Definitely. It's inborn and spontaneously grasps at the intrinsic existence of our I or mind. And it's so deeply ingrained. It's so much part of our psyche. It is more difficult to eradicate and can only be gradually eliminated on the path of meditation, not on this level. Not on this level. So on the path of meditation, which is the next level. Intellectually acquired identity view, that's the one that is eliminated on this level. This type does not arise at birth. Rather, it develops later through exposure to philosophical, religious, scientific, or cultural ideas and beliefs. Although it's rooted in the innate view. So without the innate identity view, you can't have that intellectually acquired one. So it's rooted in it and is reinforced by it. It is coarser, much coarser in nature, and it's only from this life. Therefore, it's easy to remove. So what is it? I think I'll explain it again later on. I believe there's another section that goes more into details on this, but just to say it now, for now, just reinforcing the idea of a self, right? Whichever, different religions believe definitely in a soul, maybe even Atman. So in some non-Buddhist Indian traditions, talking about Atman, like a special self, permanent, partless. We don't have an innate view that the self exists independent of mind and body, like a pea in a jar or something. But there are some non-Buddhist philosophical systems that promoted such a self. In Christianity, you have the soul. In modern psychology, I always quote Freud. Well, I don't really know. I just read that somewhere. I have no idea what I'm saying. The ego and the superego. And then as Shubham, one of the former participants of this class, said, there's a third one as well. Like there's 3 egos. Oh my gosh. So that's intellectually acquired. And even without these kind of psychological, that you find in psychology or religion, our own view of self, right? When you grew up, you probably had your own, based on your education, you had your own personal sense of what the I is, whatever that was. Or if you didn't, you traveled to India to find yourself. No, I'm joking. That is such a big thing, isn't it? This whole thing to find yourself. it's not surprising that we have that urge because we don't find ourselves. I guess it's so difficult because there's nothing to be found. That's really why. I mean, in the end, no surprise, people travel until, the other side of the world to find themselves. And when you ask them, did you find yourself? Usually they say, well, now I know what I want to do or something. But what does that even mean to find yourself? Like who I really am. And we keep constantly changing. We're probably looking for something permanent. And then something really that my essence. Well, since that's not there, I don't think you really find yourself. Okay, you could find yourself. Anyway, so and the point is that there's an intellectually acquired identity view that's based, of course, on the innate one. And it's here, this acquired form. That is the one we eliminate first. It's coarser. We've only had it in this lifetime. So that is eliminated by the meditative act of Purs, directly realizing emptiness on the path of seeing. The very realization that marks entry into the first bodhisattva ground. So get rid of that version. Okay. Should I go on a little bit? No, I won't. I'll leave it at that. I've bombarded you with a lot of stuff. Anyway, I did five pages, so that's okay. And I have the last pages for Saturday, so I won't run out this week. Okay. Now, hopefully, just to wrap it up a little bit, hopefully there is something that you take with you and you may be able to even integrate into your personal practice. Well, first of all, we learned about some of the specific qualities of a bodhisattva on the first ground, receiving a meaningful title, which means being now called ultimate bodhisattvas, but of course stressing again and again that you're already a bodhisattva before that time. You become a bodhisattva even on the path of accumulation. But there is a difference. This is a huge transformation when you attain the direct realization of emptiness. In particular, we just heard about what you remove for good, right? Some of the misperceptions that we have, being one of them being the intellectually acquired identity view. But we also heard that a bodhisattva is born into the lineage of the Tathagatas, into the family. Here, there's one Tibetan word, it's rik. It has so many different meanings. Lineage, family, type, class. So it's like lineage or family or, it's really hard into the kind, like the Buddha type. There's no real word that expresses that in a satisfactory way, I would say. Maybe like the club, the Buddha's club. You kind of now joined the Buddha's club. Yeah, it's not a club as such, but it kind of, in the type, a kind, like you join the Buddhas in that way. So in a very colloquial way, you could even say join that club, join that particular type of enlightened beings, because you're really moving now in a very profound way towards eliminating what's not in the nature of our mind. Whereas previously, it was all aspiration, you realized emptiness, of course, conceptually, but you undermined some of the afflictions, but you didn't remove anything. Or the Bodhisattvas didn't remove anything. But we also had this debate, okay, so big deal can no longer degenerate, for instance, can no longer enter the foundational vehicle path. Well, that's already happened before. So we had that debate. How, in what way is that really exclusive to the Bodhisattva on that level? And in the end, I added this explanation by some of the scholars to say, well, yeah, that is all true, but there's still a different level of stability. Okay, so that's what we covered in the first part of this particular lesson or class. And then we talked more specifically about these qualities. What was it? We talked more specifically about the next quality. Yeah, so the utterly purging or eliminating the three binding factors. And maybe that's more, it's less abstract in the sense of, well, understanding our own identity view, our own view of the transitory collection, becoming aware of it, possibly meditating on that. What is my own sense of self? So in this context, I'd like to go into some of the questions that I received, unless there are questions from your side. Do you have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
I just want to clarify.
Yes.
So the transitory collection is the innate identity, the one you are born with, or both identity views?
So identity view and view of the transitory collection are just different terms for the same thing, right? And then you have the innate identity view. That's what we're born with. That's the innate. And then the intellectually acquired is the one that, on the basis of this innate view that we were born with, and reinforced by that as well, we then create, our mind creates other versions, kind of coarser versions, and they are acquired.
So every time I hear transitory collection, I should think about the inborn, the one I was born.
No, it could be either of the two. The view of the transitory collection, or identity view. So let's call it the view of the transitory collection, which is holding on to an inherent existence of the I. It could be innate, it could be acquired. It's probably difficult to distinguish which one of my, I mean, we need a lot of mindfulness to distinguish, is that my innate one, or is that the one I believe, the one that I created basically in this life? So in terms of like coming through the influence of religion, that's pretty easy, like the soul and the ego, but the way we created ourselves, like maybe we made up our own version of who we are, then it's maybe a little bit harder for us to distinguish. I don't know. But anyway, the coarser ones we get rid of on that level.
And can I follow up?
Yes.
So this bodhisattva that is on the first ground eliminates the created one.
Yes, the acquired one.
Okay. And then when it goes up in the path to meditation, it's when eliminates the born one.
Absolutely. So I repeat what you just said, exactly. So on the path of seeing, the bodhisattva eliminates only in the intellectually acquired one. And then they move on to the next levels, of course, but not in that fashion. This is just more general, and then we talk more about generosity and so forth. But the point is, like, once they leave behind the path of seeing, then their mind, realizing emptiness directly, becomes so powerful, it can actually eliminate gradually the different levels of the innate one. But the innate one has different levels. The innate one has been with us since beginning this time. It's so deeply part of our mind that you cannot easily eliminate it with one meditative equipoise. On the path of seeing, it's just one meditative equipoise. Enter, gone. Right? Yeah, so it's just with that one. But it'll all be clear, explained more clearly later on. Yes, did you have a question?
Yes, when you talk at the beginning of at our level, when we experience happiness, it's in the nature of suffering. All the example we commonly give is about attachment, like with your friends or staying in bed. But what about love, genuine love without... so if I'm in the street and I look around and I see all people and I wish to them to be happy and everything, I don't have the same feeling as this is like in the nature of suffering. Because, I mean, I could prolong this moment for long. It's just an affliction will come and just take it away. So. Okay,
all right. So your question is, I forget to repeat the questions also for those online. Your question is, well, ordinarily when I initially talked about how all our experiences are in the nature of suffering, so even happy experiences are in the nature of suffering, what about love? What about the experience of unconditional love for other sentient beings? So just seeing someone on the street, you're not attached to them, and you just have that unconditional, that sense of just wanting them to be happy. The kind of personal happiness you experience when you have that kind of mind, is that in the nature of suffering? Strictly speaking, yes, because I don't think we can experience totally unconditional suffering, in the sense, unconditional love. Unconditional love, yes. We can't experience that, in the sense that there's still that self-grasping, which gives rise to it. So it's the mind, like we hold on to the self, it's very strongly there. So even in that moment, it is induced by it's still influenced by our other afflictions. So you see, it could be, I mean, unconditional love, you could argue, is that really unconditional love? Maybe in that moment it is. But when we talk about our experiences being in the nature of suffering, we use the word contaminated. Our happiness is contaminated. Okay, thank you. Thank you for, I was like something, yeah, thank you for that. No, but so it's like it's contaminated in the sense that it's influenced by our afflictions and our karma. So it's really difficult to think that you just have that moment of unconditional love that just pops up on its own. I mean, that wouldn't happen. It has causes and conditions, and usually our ignorance and so forth is part of it. Even if it's just thinking, oh, I want to practice this now, right? The motivation, it may give rise to that. And even in that moment, it may be really the purest we can manage, but because of the cause. Remember I talked about like baking a cake. You have the best ingredients, but one rotten egg. And then the result is this cake with all these incredible ingredients, but the cause was one rotten egg. And so the whole taste is influenced by that. So it can never be the same unconditional love, but it's great. I mean, of all you see, like when we talk about attachment, for instance, we have attachment. I mean, let's face it, we're going to have attachment until the 8th ground. And sometimes people ask me, for instance, well, if I want to practice Buddhism, I'm creating a new kind of attachment. Now I'm attached to Buddhism. Of course, I'm terribly attached to Buddhism. I'm attached to Buddhism. I'm attached to being a nun. I'm attached to everything. I mean, like, we are in the desire realm. I mean, by definition, our whole lives are, but it's a better type of attachment. So of course, we try to reduce it because the stronger, the worse it gets. But it's also about redirecting, because weakening it is one thing, but you won't be able to weaken it to such a degree that it won't be active. So redirecting it. It's better to be attached to Buddhist practice than to robbing a bank, right? So it's about redirecting it if you can't totally overcome it. So it's not about now you need to, from now on, do everything to remove attachment, and then you can do everything else. Then you can think about emptiness. No. Realizing emptiness and reaching one of the highest levels, like the 8th ground of a bodhisattva, 11th ground is Buddhahood. So you see, and the first ground only starts on the path of seeing. So that's pretty high up. Only then you eliminate attachment. So let's get used to it. But keep it in check. I mean, keep it under control, first of all, and maybe redirect it. So becoming attached to unconditional love, yeah, knock yourself out, better than being attached to something else. Yeah, I mean, being attached to that feeling, oh, that felt so good. I want a little bit more unconditional love, right? So it's kind of conditional because it makes me feel so good. So I don't want anyone else to, smile back at me or whatever. I just want that feeling back. So it's kind of conditional, isn't it? Okay. Right, perfect. Okay, great. So I better start with those ones online because they've been on there for quite a while. But in that context, well, maybe I start chronologically. That's just fair. Jimmy. Oh yeah. So Jimmy, he says, for more than a decade, that's a long time, 10 to 12, 13 years, I think I've summarized it a little bit. I've been trying to understand the meaning of the phrase, things don't exist from their own side. You don't talk like that. I mean, you can't, that's not proper English, really. That's what Tika would call Buddhist hybrid English, yeah. So at one point, I even pasted it on my wall, he says, so I would see it every day and keep contemplating it. I've tried to restate it in different words without losing the meaning and came up with versions like, things do not project their own appearances. Dependent arising is the only side. The side thing, like what is that side? The only side is the side of imputation. And so forth, everything is merely imputed. I'm not sure how close any of these come. These 7 expressions or phrases he uses still feel mysterious, especially when I hear expressions such as sentient beings want to be happy from their own side. That is my broken English. I thought I don't say that, because it's really not. Why would I say that? But last time I caught myself saying it. I thought I did, right? And there was this whole discussion. Geshe Doji Damdu doesn't use it. I'm very sure he's very mindful of not using these expressions, especially because you don't have to. It's not part of the English language. Versus words such as inherent and intrinsic. They're words of the everyday kind of words. And so it's difficult not to use them. And honestly, even in Tibetan, I shouldn't say honestly, but in fact, in Tibetan, the words that are used for not inherently existent, Rangshingi Matuba. So Rangshin means natural. And they use it in ordinary terms. Water is naturally hot. Because fire is naturally hot. Or they say, so they use these expressions, so it's in naturally such and such. But then in the context of emptiness, they say it does not exist naturally or inherently. Okay? So in a particular context, even independence, I mean, they talk about independence for Tibet, right? So and then they say nothing exists independently. Okay, it's a slightly different word, but even if they use that other word, you see, we can use this, and I've said that before. For instance, I can say India is an independent country. It is an independent country, but not an absolute independent country. It's independent in relation to its political decisions or its economic situation, whatever. So whatever we conventionally would say independent means, but it's not an absolute independent country. That'd be ridiculous. It's got its own oxygen that doesn't depend on it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And of course, economically and politically, it is dependent on other countries. Therefore, independent here is just a relative type of independent. But what we're negating is an absolute independence. Or when we say objectively, nothing exists subjectively. Well, we say, oh, look at the situation objectively. It doesn't mean that there is an absolute objective way of looking at things. That would be ridiculous. Without using your mind, think about it. It's not going to happen. It means without certain emotions, negative emotions, certain attachment and so forth. Look at it objectively, without attachment. So there's no absolute objectivity. Then there's another example. For instance, fire is inherently hot. Is that a correct statement? No, don't take off the Buddhist hat. So is it correct to say in normal kind of colloquial English, fire is inherently hot? Yes, that's totally okay to say, because in relation to the fact that you don't need to heat it up, it's inherently hot. So take water. Is water inherently hot? No, because you need an external source, source of heat or heating source in order to warm up or heat up water. But on the other hand, is water inherently wet? Yes, but not absolutely, because you need something other than water for water to be wet. Hydrogen and oxygen. You need something other than water. So actually, when we say inherently existent, yeah, we say ordinarily in conventional terms, yeah, water is inherently wet, but not absolutely inherently wet, which would mean it exists totally independently of anything. It doesn't exist on anything other than itself to be wet, but it does exist on something other than itself to be wet. For instance, perceiving it as wet. we have a particular, I mean, water itself actually is not wet as such. That quality is perceived by our body consciousness. We you know, there's no wetness as such. When we say wet, we mean how it feels to us. Or fire is hot. You know, like if you were a sentient being that would experience fire as cold, what is it then? Right? I mean, let's say you have the kind of skin that is just due to some kind of nerve problem or whatever, you see it the other way around. What then? Right? Is it hot or is it cold? But again, so the point is therefore an absolute independence, an absolute objectivity, an absolute inherence, as in like not dependent on anything else. That's impossible. Even fire is hot, water is wet, independence on hydrogen and oxygen. Fire is hot, independence on oxygen. Without oxygen, no fire, and therefore no heat. So now arising from its own side. Okay. What does it mean to exist from its own side? But just another way of saying inherently. And some notes in here as part of my answer. So if a table existed from its own side, it would mean that tableness is built in it. From its own side doesn't mean imputed, doesn't mean, side means from the side of the table. So the table is a table from the side, what's a better word for side? From the table's own part. Character. By way of its own character. So by way of the character of the table, it's a table. By way of the side of the table. What is that side? It's the table itself. So it's not the other side, like our mind and so forth. No, it's from the side of the table. That's simply what it means. It's in Tibetan they say rang ne truba. Rang ne truba. Rang means side. Ne truba. From the side of the, so it's a literal translation from the Tibetan. The side of your face. So for Jeff, he knows Tibetan, so I was spelling it out. So it would be a table by its own, if it existed from its own side of being a table, it would mean that the tableness is built into it. It would be a table by its own nature, by its own absolute intrinsic nature, independent of anything else. The table identity would be inside the table itself, like a fixed essence existing within it. If that were true, then anyone in any realm, even if they've never seen or used furniture, would still have to recognize it as a table. If that was from the side of the object, everyone would see it as a table. It has nothing to do with the mind, so everyone would see it that way, right? Its tableness would be objectively present, entirely independent and self-established. It's kind of like it itself has made itself a table in that sense. But in actuality, the table depends on its causes and conditions, its parts, its attributes and functions, and our conceptual mind. Strip away these dependencies and there's no table left. If you were to strip away causes and conditions, parts of the table, attributes, functions, and so forth, and the conceptual mind, having the thought, table, there wouldn't be a table. That's what it means. It doesn't exist from its own side. It means that it depends on so many other sides, so many other phenomena. So side here, does anyone have a clever synonym for side? Exists from the part of the table, from the side of the table, from the...
Power of the object.
Pardon?
Power of the object.
Yeah, but power is... Side does not replace power, right? The side is the object itself. The side, it does not exist from...
Sometimes people use the term identitylessness as opposed to selflessness, like identitylessness, but then that's also...
Not from its own identity, maybe. Does not exist by way of the identity of the table. Yeah.
Doesn't really count.
But can an object have an identity?
Conventionally, you have an identity.
But it's not a living being, so it doesn't seem.
That way, in that way. Our identity. Yeah, we kind of give objects like this agency. Wasn't that you, Georgina? Yeah, I never forget Georgina when she said that. She said once, that's so weird in Buddhism. We give objects these agency, like they're functioning and like they're doing all this stuff. Yeah, actually, it's true. In ordinary English, you wouldn't say it has an identity, right? Like a table has an identity, but you wouldn't say it has a self either.
Geshe, because the other word that comes into my head is perspective, but that also, and somebody else.
Perspective.
From the perspective rather from the side, but that still sounds like it's.
No, but perspective means my perspective, right? From the perspective of the table. Oh, okay, because the table doesn't have a mind, so it doesn't have a perspective. Yeah.
It's only really for something.
Yeah, right. Okay.
From its own.
From its own. Yeah, he's right. From its own. It's actually best. The table doesn't exist as a table from its own. From the tableness. From being a table. So the side actually means, like the side of this phone is just everything that makes up this phone. Not like a side, like in like a corner, a side, or what? Not literally in like the side of a wall or something. Yeah.
But are there actually people that believe that the table has an identity, or like we talk about it like this, but I've never met someone, like even people that believe in God think maybe God has established these things, but I don't think anyone thinks that the table exists without causes and conditions.
Oh, well, we believe intellectually, but innately it's a different matter. You see, it's very interesting. There's a gap when you look at your own mind. I mean, for instance, let me give you an example. I know I could die tomorrow, but deep inside I feel, no, I'm not going to die, I'm too busy. I've got a lot planned for the next week. It's not going to happen, right? Like it feels, we know intellectually. We know so much intellectually. I know, and I give you the same examples again and again, but I know they make you laugh. I know beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. And still I feel like, oh, these curtains, how could they put up these curtains? They don't know what looks good. Yeah. Right? Yeah, these ones, I would not put those ones. So therefore there's like a gap between intellectually I understand, yeah, you're right. But deep within, that's a totally different level. It's more an emotional level.
But and that we're discussing is also just intellectual, no?
Pardon?
The way we discuss emptiness is also just going on this conceptual intellectual.
Yes, that's where we get to the intellectual first. And then try to, the first thing is we study it. That's very intellectual. And then reflection, we take it a little deeper. And then meditation. That's when you take it onto on an emotional level. Yes, so that's the whole thing. We can only go via the intellectual, but the point is not to stop there, but to internalize it. Yes, Jeff?
Is there a place, or where is the place where, so there's an object. Mm-hmm. Here we're playing around with the table. Mm-hmm. That as soon as, if our relationship with the table, if a thing can become a mine, mm-hmm. then we get into the problem, right? My table.
Mm-hmm. My table.
Because, as I don't know.
Rika
mm-hmm. said, I don't know anyone who sees the table and doesn't know that there's causes and conditions that make the table. Well,
right, yes.
That's great. But actually, when we just look, that's probably her table, that's his table, right? But then I've been here for a while now, a couple hours, I'm feeling like this is my table. As soon as we get into the mind problem, then our relationship with the thing that is appearing to our minds falsely as existing from its own side, that's where we get into the gunk.
You're right, that's true.
Is there a...
Interesting. Let me just repeat what Rika says just for the recording. So Rika actually said she doesn't believe there's anyone who doesn't think a table doesn't come from causes and conditions. So how could you actually believe the table exists independently? And in response to that, I said it's much more on a deeper level. Yes. And then Jeff says, well, not just that, but also when it comes to believing this is mine. If it's just a table, anyone's table, I don't care. Yeah, made from causes and conditions. There is not, the sense of its intrinsic existence is not as pronounced.
Right.
There's a much stronger sense once it becomes mine. Then my view of this table becomes more and more unrealistic.
More reified.
More reified, exactly. More reified in the sense of perceiving it to be more inherently existence, right? And how dare you look at my table? Don't take my table, right?
Right.
Worrying about the table, believing my happiness. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you can replace the table with other people and so forth. So believing my happiness to be dependent on that object, for instance. I can't be happy without that object. Intellectually, it's a whole different matter, but on a more emotional level. And I want to add something. No, before I add something, no. So with attachment, yeah, that's an interesting one. Because it causes some conditions, I don't care. Almost like even if it wasn't, like intellectually, okay, but on a deeper level, or just its parts, or that's to do with my mind, it doesn't feel that way. I just don't want to be separated from it. That's the point. It's now part of me. And I'm attached to me, therefore I'm attached to I, therefore I'm attached to mine. And that has become a part of me. My happiness, my well-being is dependent on it. And again, it sounds ridiculous to talk about tables that way, but there are beautiful tables, let's face it. We need them. And there are other objects, of course, as well. But what is very interesting, aversion works in a similar way. I once listened to this BBC program. I've shared that with you many times. It was such a beautiful program. It was about the serial killer, a woman who had killed other children and she had killed other women, mothers and so forth. And she sounded horrible, horrible. And I could feel in my mind resentment, right? Like, oh my God, and she was presented as this evil being. And it's very interesting because she was imprisoned. I think she was assassinated in the end. She was executed, I shouldn't say assassinated, executed in the end. But there was someone with her, a psychologist, who became quite close to her. And she was interviewed on that program. And she talked about the 3 types of dependence in a way. First, she talked about the causes and conditions that made her who she was. Wow, what she underwent as a child. She was chained to some radiator as a child. She was tortured. She was terribly, terribly treated. I mean, unbelievable. And so you understand the causes and conditions and your aversion. What happens to your aversion? Very difficult to keep up with that. So you see, like, it feels like first there's just this evil person. When we say evil person, that word evil person seems to imply there's something intrinsic in that person that distinguishes her from everyone else. No, but there were causes and conditions that turned her. And the moment you start talking about it, you soften. Your view softens. So you don't think about in that moment, yes, if Rika, as she's saying, are you thinking she comes without causes and conditions? Of course not. Yeah, she had a mother and had a father. But when we understand what causes and conditions exactly give rise to that solidity of like evil, it lessens. Then she talks about how she, although killed so many people, she always looked after her sister. She did so much for her sister. She, as she grew up, already tried to spare her from some of the suffering she herself underwent. And so she was very loving with her sister and also with that psychologist. And the psychologist said, there's more than the evil side. She's much more complicated. Much more complicated. And so you need to look at her from all sides. She's not evil because she has many different parts. She's dependent on many different parts. Yeah, there's the murderous side, but there's also the beautiful side. She had good qualities. And the last is, we label her as evil. Her sister labeled her as my dear sister who saved my life. Wow. There's one view. There's a different view. Labeling her a murderess, labeling her evil, right? Then I see only that. That's my reality, my mind in that moment. And it's not wrong. She is a murderer. but she's also a kind sister. And so that is also a reality. And so I believe, I'm labeling that because that's who she is. But actually that's just a label, that's just one part of her. There's this other side as well. So she explained that, and I was like, wow, those are the 3 types of dependence, and I can no longer have that kind of resentment. It kind of dissolved it, which shows whether it's attachment, whether it's aversion. If we think, even without thinking of emptiness, just considering the 3 types of dependence, the afflictions can no longer work in the same way. Isn't that beautiful? So with attachment, yes, it's kind of like there's this intellectual mind and then there's the emotional mind. And that's why when we meditate, we have to bring it onto an emotional level. Emotions are so powerful. You have to really feel it. And it's very hard to describe these emotions, but this emotion, oh my God, this woman is not intrinsically evil. It's so much more complicated. And so to feel that, then if you really have that sense, that feeling then replaces your negative feelings of hatred and so forth. And so Rika is right. First it's just intellectual. That's the first access point. Because we won't be able to bring it onto an emotional level right away. But that's why study is only the first step. Right? Okay, anyway. We're done for, and I still have all these other ones. Sorry for all of those waiting for quite some time. I'll address them next time. But they're all really beautiful and give rise to a lot of discussions. But hopefully with the existing from its own side, we clarified that, though I still don't have an alternative term for side. Anyway, let's dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated. In this snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay. You didn't get